I have seen the depths of human suffering in ways that words struggle to contain. The camps were not merely places of imprisonment, they were crucibles where the human spirit was tested, stripped bare, and confronted with the question of existence in its rawest form. Stripped of name, identity, comfort, and hope, one is left to confront a singular question: what meaning, if any, can life have in the face of unrelenting horror? Imagine waking each morning not with anticipation, but with dread, not with purpose, but with the knowledge that every moment may demand the impossible, endurance beyond reason, dignity amidst degradation, hope when the world has declared none. And yet, even there, amidst the filth, the fear, the despair, life continues. Life demands a response, and the soul, however battered, cannot remain silent. I watched men who had once held positions of respect, who had once been fathers, scholars, craftsmen, lovers of life, reduced to shadows of themselves by cruelty and neglect. And yet, some found a spark that death could not extinguish, the recognition that even in suffering, meaning could be found, even in chains, freedom could be exercised, even in despair, hope could emerge. It was in the smallest moments that this truth revealed itself. A shared piece of bread, a whispered word of encouragement, the courage to care for another despite one's own peril. These were acts that defied the barbarity around us. They were reminders that humanity is not measured by comfort or safety, but by the choices we make when both are stripped away. Have you ever considered that suffering itself may be the doorway to the deepest understanding of life, that it is precisely in our confrontation with the unbearable that the soul awakens? The camps stripped us of everything external, yet they illuminated the inner realm of choice, the freedom to decide one's attitude, the courage to affirm life even when life seems unjust, the capacity to love even when hate surrounds. I remember those who surrendered to despair, their spirits collapsing under the weight of hopelessness. And I remember those who, despite unimaginable pain, refused to yield. They found meaning in the act of creation, in the memory of loved ones, in small gestures of kindness, in the pursuit of truth that no camp could ever imprison. And I learned that it is in these choices, sometimes invisible, often unnoticed, that the essence of freedom resides. Consider the paradox: the world sought to rob us of life, yet in the very act of striving to endure, we discovered what it means to be alive. Life, even under the harshest conditions, demands a response. The circumstances may be brutal, but the spirit remains capable of dignity, courage, and meaning. It is in this awareness that I discovered the principle that would guide the rest of my existence. Between stimulus and response, there is a space. In that space lies our power to choose our attitude, our meaning, our humanity. Have you ever asked yourself, what would I do if everything familiar were stripped away, if the comforts, the certainties, the distractions vanished, leaving only the essence of existence? This was the question posed daily in the camps. And the answer is not theoretical. It is discovered in lived experience, in the confrontation with suffering, in the decision to act consciously even when every external indicator says surrender. I observed acts of heroism that were silent, acts of defiance that took no trophies, acts of compassion that were unrecorded, yet they shone brighter than any triumph in comfort or luxury. For it is in extremity that character is forged, courage is revealed, and meaning is discovered. And it was there that I realized, suffering, when met with awareness and purpose, can become a doorway, a teacher, a crucible of profound insight. Do not misunderstand me. I am not glorifying suffering. I am not suggesting that cruelty or deprivation are necessary for meaning. But I am affirming that meaning is possible even in the most adverse circumstances. That freedom, true freedom, exists not as an external condition, but as an inner choice. That love, hope, and purpose can endure, even when the body is enslaved and the world seems devoid of mercy. And so I ask you to reflect, when confronted with your own hardships, your own constraints, your own suffering, will you perceive them as mere misfortune, or as an opportunity to exercise freedom, to discover meaning, to assert the dignity of your existence? The camps taught me that the measure of a life is not in ease, but in response, not in comfort, but in courage, not in what is given, but in what is chosen. In the camps, time itself seemed to lose its ordinary shape. Days blended into nights, moments of terror interspersed with fleeting glimpses of humanity. Hunger was relentless, cold was unyielding, fear was omnipresent, yet the mind and the spirit remained capable of reflection, of awareness, of choice. I discovered that even in the most constrained conditions, freedom persists in the space between stimulus and response. I remember a man who had been a teacher before the war, reduced now to nothing more than a number, a shadow. He looked around him, at the despair and degradation, and whispered to himself, "I still have my mind. They cannot take that from me." In that whisper, I heard a profound truth: even when every external freedom is stripped away, the inner life remains sovereign. Thought, reflection, conscience, and attitude cannot be taken unless willingly surrendered. We learned quickly that suffering could either crush or illuminate. Some allowed it to embitter them, to silence them, to turn them into shells of what they had been. Others, in the very same circumstances, discovered the extraordinary capacity of the human spirit. They found meaning in caring for others, in remembering loved ones, in cultivating hope, and in observing the smallest acts of beauty and dignity amidst horror. I noticed that those who survived most fully were not necessarily the strongest physically. Often, it was the ones who could find meaning in each moment, who could choose their attitude consciously, who could hold onto a vision of life beyond the immediate suffering. The external world imposed its brutality, yes, but the inner world, that sacred space of reflection and choice, remained untouchable. One evening, as the cold pierced our bodies and hunger gnawed at our bellies, I saw a man sharing his meager bread with another who had none. A small, silent act, unnoticed by the guards, unseen by the world, yet monumental in its significance. In that simple gesture, I understood something essential: meaning is not always found in grand accomplishments or public recognition. It is found in the conscious choices we make, in the love and responsibility we extend even when it seems meaningless to the outside observer. And so I learned the paradox: suffering is not the obstacle to meaning, it is often the catalyst. The cruel environment forced us to confront the essence of our existence, to strip away all illusions, and to ask ourselves, who am I when everything else is gone? What can I still choose? What can I still give? In the absence of everything, the soul reveals its capacity for freedom, courage, and love. We clung to memories, to visions of a life beyond the barbed wire, to promises we made to ourselves and to loved ones. These were not distractions, they were lifelines. The imagination, the inner life, the capacity to envision meaning and purpose beyond the suffering, became as essential as bread and water. Without it, survival was merely existence. With it, survival became a statement of human dignity. Have you considered that even in the worst circumstances, the human spirit seeks significance that we cannot endure without a reason, without a why that sustains us? I discovered that those who lived fully were those who had a purpose, even if it was unseen, even if it was simple, even if it was hidden from the world. Purpose became the shield against despair, the light in darkness, the silent companion of those who refused to surrender their inner freedom. And here lies the ultimate teaching of the camps: external circumstances, however brutal, cannot extinguish the human capacity to choose, to find meaning, to affirm life. We are not defined by what happens to us, but by how we respond. Even in the face of death, even amidst cruelty, even under the most extreme deprivation, the soul retains the capacity for freedom, dignity, and love. Even amidst the darkness, love endured. I observed it quietly, often in ways so subtle that one could easily miss it, a hand held in silence, a reassuring glance, a whispered promise of reunion, a memory of someone waiting beyond the fences. Love became the invisible force that sustained the soul, reminding us that even in captivity, we could choose to care, to connect, to affirm the humanity of others and ourselves. It was here, in the harshest conditions, that I realized something profound. The external world may imprison the body, yet it cannot enslave the spirit. The human capacity to find meaning, to act with conscience, and to choose one's attitude remains untouched. Every act of kindness, every gesture of solidarity, every moment of courage is a declaration of freedom, a defiance of the tyranny that surrounds us. I remember thinking, again and again, of those I loved and those I hoped to see once more. It was in these memories that I discovered a power stronger than despair, the anticipation of a future that still held purpose, the vision of a life that still held meaning. The mind, even when the body was exhausted, became a sanctuary, a place where freedom could be exercised and the soul could affirm life. Do not underestimate the power of hope, even in the most dire circumstances. It is not mere fantasy, it is a conscious choice to recognize that suffering does not define the soul, that life's value persists even when external conditions are unbearable. Hope is not passive, it requires vigilance, reflection, and courage. It demands that we refuse to surrender our inner life, no matter how cruelly the outside world conspires against us. I saw men who, despite hunger, cold, and cruelty, refused to let bitterness consume them. They found purpose in helping others, in maintaining dignity, in preserving the memory of who they were and who they wished to become. And in doing so, they discovered the essence of life itself, that meaning is not bestowed by circumstances, but created through conscious, deliberate engagement with the reality that confronts us. Consider this, even when all external freedoms are stripped away, there remains a freedom no one can take. The freedom to choose one's attitude. The freedom to respond with courage, with love, with purpose. This freedom is the heart of human dignity. It is what separates mere survival from living. And it is what allows the soul to rise above suffering, transforming it into a crucible of profound insight and spiritual growth. And so, in the midst of unimaginable horror, I learned a lesson that has guided me ever since: life never ceases to demand a response. Even when faced with cruelty, injustice, and death, we are called to act consciously. To choose love over hate, hope over despair, meaning over emptiness. It is in this choice, exercised moment by moment, that true freedom and dignity are realized. Reflect, if you will, on the smallest gestures, a comforting word, a shared morsel of food, a smile offered despite fear. These are not trivial, they are manifestations of the human spirit, proof that even in the depths of suffering, the capacity to act with purpose and compassion remains, and in these acts, meaning flourishes where one might least expect it. I wish for you to understand this truth as deeply as I came to. No matter how dire the circumstances, the soul retains its freedom. It can choose its response, find purpose, and affirm life. The external world may dictate suffering, deprivation, and injustice, but it cannot dictate the inner life. That choice, that awareness, that exercise of the spirit, is where life, even in its harshest form, finds its highest meaning. It was in the moments when all seemed lost that the most profound revelations emerged. I observed men and women who had been reduced to nothing, whose bodies trembled with weakness, whose spirits had been battered by relentless cruelty, yet who discovered within themselves a source of light that no oppression could extinguish. In the depths of despair, the soul asserted its sovereignty, proving that freedom is not an external condition but an inner reality. One evening, as the guards receded and the camp lay in fragile silence, I reflected on the paradox that had become so evident. The world sought to destroy us, to rob us of life, to crush our dignity, yet it was precisely in this extremity that the essence of our humanity was revealed. The cruelty around us highlighted the courage within us, the deprivation exposed the power of consciousness, the threat of death illuminated the value of each conscious choice. I remember holding the memory of my loved ones close, letting it warm the frozen despair inside me. This act was not fantasy, it was defiance. It was an assertion that though the body could be imprisoned, the spirit could soar. The imagination became a sanctuary, a place where the future could still be envisioned, where hope could still flourish, where meaning could still be claimed. And I saw it in others as well, small acts of courage and compassion that were invisible to the world but monumental in significance. A word of encouragement whispered in darkness, a loaf of bread shared quietly, a hand extended despite fear. All these acts became testimony to the resilience of the human spirit. They were proof that even when everything external is stripped away, the inner life remains untouchable, and with it, the capacity for love, dignity, and meaning. I realized then that suffering, as extreme as it might be, does not preclude meaning. On the contrary, it often illuminates it. When all external markers of value are gone, possessions, status, comfort, the soul is confronted with the fundamental question, how will I respond? And the answer, however simple or small, reveals the depth of one's humanity. Freedom, I discovered, is the last human freedom. It is the ability to choose one's attitude in any given set of circumstances. It is the realization that no one can dictate our response, that even in chains, in hunger, in fear, in the shadow of death, the spirit can assert its sovereignty. And this freedom is inseparable from meaning, the capacity to choose consciously, to act with purpose, to affirm life, even when life seems unworthy of affirmation. Do not underestimate the power of this insight. It is not abstract philosophy, it is a living reality experienced in the harshest of crucibles. It is the understanding that no matter how dire the circumstances, the soul retains the power to choose, the capacity to love, the ability to find significance. It is in these choices that the true measure of life is found. And so I ask you, as I once asked myself, when confronted with suffering, with fear, with injustice, with the abyss, what will you choose? Will you succumb to despair, to bitterness, to resignation, or will you claim the freedom that remains, the capacity to respond consciously, the opportunity to discover meaning even in the most unyielding conditions? Remember, it is not the external world that defines us, but our inner response to it. Each act of awareness, courage, and love is a declaration of freedom, a defiance of oppression, and a manifestation of meaning. And it is in these acts, however small they may seem, that life proves its value, even in the midst of suffering. And now, as I reflect upon those days, I see with absolute clarity what truly matters. It is not comfort, not safety, not recognition, not wealth. It is the inner life, the choices we make in the face of suffering, the courage to assert our humanity when the world seeks to destroy it. In the camps, stripped of all that was external, I discovered that the essence of freedom lies within. I watched men and women reduced to shadows, yet some shone with a quiet radiance. They had nothing left to lose, and in that void, they discovered everything. Their dignity, their courage, their capacity to love, their ability to find meaning even in the unthinkable. They proved that life is never devoid of purpose, even when circumstances are cruel beyond imagination. Consider this: the camp walls, the barbed wire, the cruelty of guards, the hunger, the cold, the threat of death. They could not touch the space within us where choice resided. No matter the deprivation, no matter the terror, the soul remains sovereign. And in that sovereignty, meaning was born. It was fragile, often hidden, sometimes fleeting, but it existed, quietly affirming that life is always worth something, even when it seems to be taken away. I remember vividly the paradox that sustained me: the world intended to crush us, yet it revealed the depth of our capacity to endure, to hope, to love, to act with purpose. Each decision to hold on to dignity, each act of kindness amidst horror, each refusal to surrender to despair, these were the moments in which freedom flourished, in which the soul affirmed itself, in which meaning emerged triumphant. And so I ask you, even now, when faced with suffering, when confronted by fear, when stripped of certainty, what will you choose? Will you allow external conditions to dictate your life, or will you claim the freedom that no one can take, the freedom to respond, to act consciously, to affirm your own existence with courage, love, and purpose? The camps taught me this essential truth: we are not defined by what happens to us, but by how we respond. Our suffering is not meaningless unless we allow it to be. Our freedom is never lost unless we surrender it. And our capacity to discover meaning is eternal, no matter how harshly the world tests us. So take this to heart: even in the depths of despair, even in the shadow of death, even when every external comfort is stripped away, you are still capable of freedom. You are still capable of love. You are still capable of meaning. Nothing can take these away unless you allow it. They are the last human freedom, the ultimate dignity, the enduring truth of our existence. And with that, I leave you with this: the camp was a place of unimaginable horror, yet it became the crucible in which I learned the most profound lesson of life: that suffering, when met with consciousness, courage, and responsibility, becomes the gateway to freedom, to meaning, to the affirmation of life itself. Remember this, and no matter the circumstances you face, your spirit can remain unbroken, your life can retain dignity, and your soul can discover its true purpose. Emerging from the camps, one carries more than scars upon the body. One carries a vision, a revelation, a silent understanding of what life demands when stripped of all illusions. The world beyond the barbed wire is familiar and yet transformed, a place of ordinary routines, faces, and streets that suddenly seem to pulse with new significance. And the question that accompanies every step is the same: how will I live now? Having seen the extremity of existence and the essence of freedom, I discovered quickly that the lessons of the camp were not to be tucked away as memories or buried in the past. They demanded integration, reflection, conscious application. To live fully after such suffering requires more than survival, it requires deliberate engagement with life, informed by the truths uncovered in the crucible of deprivation, cruelty, and fear. Life, I realized, can never be reduced to comfort or avoidance. True living requires awareness, responsibility, and the willingness to confront each moment with courage. The pain endured in the camp had revealed that freedom is not an external condition, it is an inner choice. And this choice, exercised deliberately, becomes the compass by which one navigates the complexities of post-trauma life, the uncertainties of rebuilding, the search for meaning in a world that is both ordinary and extraordinary. I met people upon liberation who had survived physically yet remained imprisoned by their memories. Their bodies were free, but their minds and spirits were shackled by the weight of what they had witnessed. And I understood, liberation is not merely the removal of chains, it is the conscious reclamation of life, the assertion of choice, the pursuit of purpose. Freedom must be exercised continuously, not simply assumed. In rebuilding life, I came to recognize the subtle but profound truths that suffering imparts, that meaning is always available, even in adversity, that the inner life cannot be taken by circumstance, that our responses define us far more than our experiences, and that love, compassion, and responsibility are the ultimate expressions of human dignity. These truths are not theoretical, they are practical, lived realities, forged in extremity and applied in ordinary existence. Have you ever noticed how ordinary acts become extraordinary when performed consciously, deliberately, and with awareness of their meaning? A conversation, a gesture, a choice of kindness, a refusal to retaliate. These are the building blocks of a life reconstructed after trauma. They are the proof that freedom, dignity, and meaning are not abstract ideals but lived experiences, discovered in the deliberate responses we offer to each unfolding moment. I began to apply these insights not only to myself but to others. Teaching, listening, observing, guiding each interaction became an opportunity to affirm life, to illuminate meaning, to cultivate freedom in those whose spirits had been dimmed by suffering. The experience of extreme deprivation had endowed me with a profound empathy, a recognition of the human capacity for both despair and transcendence, and a clarity about what life demands when it is stripped of distraction, illusion, and superficiality. And here lies a central truth of reconstruction: to live authentically after trauma is to engage consciously with every aspect of existence, to allow the lessons of suffering to inform the choices, relationships, and purposes that define our daily lives. It is to recognize that each act, each word, each thought carries the potential to affirm or diminish life, and that the deliberate pursuit of meaning is the highest responsibility we can undertake. I came to understand that happiness, often sought as a goal in itself, is a byproduct of living in alignment with these principles. It is not found in the accumulation of comfort or the avoidance of pain, but in the conscious embrace of responsibility, the pursuit of purpose, and the exercise of freedom in thought, word, and deed. Happiness, then, is not something to chase, it is something to allow as the natural outcome of living a meaningful life. And so, emerging from suffering into the ordinary world, I realized that the life I had once taken for granted was now rich with potential. Every interaction, every choice, every challenge was infused with the possibility of freedom, meaning, and dignity. The external world remained complex, unpredictable, and often unjust, yet within the inner realm, the soul was sovereign, and in this sovereignty, life regained its full significance, its depth, and its potential for transformation. The camps were a theater of human extremity, where every day presented a choice between surrender and assertion of self. Hunger was a constant companion, cold a relentless oppressor, and fear a shadow that never left. Yet even there, I realized that the mind could remain free. Between the stimulus of suffering and the response of the spirit, there existed a space where freedom could be exercised. That space, no one could take away. I witnessed men and women stripped of names, reduced to numbers, yet retaining the possibility of thought, reflection, and inner choice. Some surrendered entirely to despair, their spirits collapsing under relentless cruelty. Others, in the same circumstances, discovered that the soul could assert itself even when the body was broken, that freedom was not in avoiding suffering but in responding consciously to it. This is the first paradox I observed: the more extreme the deprivation, the more vividly freedom revealed itself. External conditions may be harsh, unyielding, and unjust, but they cannot dictate the inner life unless willingly surrendered. And the inner life is where meaning, dignity, and hope persist. I remember seeing acts of kindness that were invisible to the world yet monumental in significance. A man sharing his meager bread, a whispered word of encouragement, a hand held in silence. These small gestures illuminated the darkness around us. They were proof that even in the most extreme adversity, the human capacity for compassion, love, and meaning remains. These moments taught me that suffering is not the enemy of meaning, it is often the teacher. The camp stripped away superficialities, leaving only the essential, the capacity to choose, the opportunity to act with conscience, the ability to affirm life even when external circumstances suggest otherwise. Every conscious act became a declaration of freedom, a rebellion against oppression, a testament to the resilience of the human spirit. Even when food was scarce and the cold pierced our bones, memory became a sanctuary. I held images of loved ones, of conversations, of life before the camp, and these memories were lifelines. They reminded me that the external world, however cruel, could not erase the inner life. Imagination, reflection, and memory were not escapes, they were instruments of survival, tools for cultivating meaning, and shields against the tyranny of despair. I encouraged others to remember as well. Some clung to music, some to poetry, some to promises made silently to family members. In these recollections, we discovered that the soul could sustain itself, that meaning could be cultivated even when all external markers of security were removed, and that hope was possible even in the shadow of death. In every harsh circumstance, there was a choice: to succumb to despair, to surrender identity, to allow fear to dominate, or to assert the freedom of the inner life, to act consciously, to respond with dignity, courage, and love. The freedom I speak of is not trivial. It is the last human freedom, the ability to decide one's attitude, even when every external condition is designed to crush it. I observed prisoners who found purpose in caring for others, who refused to retaliate with hatred, who maintained their dignity despite humiliation. They were not naive, they were profoundly aware of the danger, yet they exercised their inner freedom. In these choices, the essence of humanity shone brighter than the brutality surrounding them. The paradox of the camps became evident: suffering, extreme as it was, revealed the inner strength and capacity for meaning that comfort often conceals. Those who embraced responsibility for their inner life, who refused to surrender entirely to fear or despair, discovered that meaning can exist even in the most unthinkable circumstances. I learned to distinguish between suffering that crushes and suffering that enlightens. The difference lies not in the external conditions but in the response of the spirit. To face suffering consciously, to seek purpose within it, to act with courage despite it, that is the essence of freedom. Amidst cruelty, love endured. It was quiet, often unnoticed, yet profoundly sustaining. A comforting glance, a whispered word, a shared morsel, these acts defied the world's attempt to dehumanize us. They reminded us that the soul can assert itself in the smallest choices, that freedom is exercised in the decision to act with compassion and dignity, and that meaning is discovered in the connection to others, even under the harshest conditions. I realized that love is not merely a pleasant emotion, it is a lifeline, a form of resistance, a manifestation of human dignity. Even when all else is taken, love can sustain, illuminate, and affirm life. The ever-present shadow of death forced a profound question upon every prisoner: what does life demand of me, even here, even now? The answer is not found in comfort or avoidance but in deliberate engagement with existence. By choosing attitude, by affirming meaning, by acting with responsibility, we exercised the ultimate freedom. Death may be unavoidable, but despair is optional. I discovered that purpose does not require safety or comfort. It exists in conscious response to reality. It exists in caring for others, in preserving memory, in maintaining dignity, in choosing courage. The most ordinary acts, when performed with awareness and meaning, become extraordinary. I remember the first morning when the cold penetrated my bones so deeply that it seemed to touch the marrow of my being, and yet even as my body trembled, my mind retained the ability to reflect, to choose, to perceive that between the stimulus of suffering and my response, there existed a space where freedom persisted. That space, invisible yet immutable, became my sanctuary. I understood that no matter how much the world sought to crush me, the inner life could not be taken without consent. I saw men around me, their eyes hollowed by hunger and fear, their spirits trembling, and I realized that some had surrendered entirely, while others, in the same unbearable conditions, discovered a wellspring of resilience, a capacity for thought, for dignity, for the assertion of self that the guards could never command nor destroy. The paradox was clear: the more extreme the external deprivation, the more vividly the power of choice revealed itself. I witnessed acts of subtle courage that the world would never acknowledge. A man would divide a crust of bread, whispering encouragement to another who seemed on the verge of collapse. A hand would be extended in silence, not to ask, but to give. I saw eyes light up briefly with recognition, a spark of humanity that refused to be extinguished. These small, almost imperceptible acts became beacons in the darkness, proof that the soul remains sovereign, proof that even in the absence of comfort, safety, and security, meaning could still be cultivated. Memory and imagination became essential lifelines. I carried the faces of loved ones with me, imagined conversations not yet had, revisited moments of tenderness, laughter, and promise. These were not escapes, they were deliberate exercises of freedom, instruments to assert life in the midst of death, to preserve dignity when the world sought to strip it away. Every recollection was a shield, every mental act a declaration that the inner life remained untouchable, that even here, even now, one could choose hope over despair, courage over resignation, meaning over emptiness. I noticed the silent paradox: those who clung to memory, to vision, to imagination often outlasted those who surrendered completely to the external reality, not merely surviving physically, but thriving spiritually, asserting a freedom that could not be taken. Each day presented innumerable choices: to let fear dictate action, to allow anger and bitterness to fester, to succumb to hopelessness, or to assert the freedom of the inner life, to respond consciously, to act with dignity, to find meaning even when external circumstances seemed absurdly cruel. I observed those who acted with deliberate conscience, who refused hatred, who chose compassion, and I understood that freedom was not merely absence of restraint but an active, living engagement with the reality of existence. Love, too, persisted in ways subtle yet powerful: a glance shared in secret, a whispered encouragement, a silent acknowledgement of another's suffering. All these acts defied the world's attempts to dehumanize us. I realized that love is not a luxury but a necessity, a sustaining force that cannot be measured by comfort or safety. It is an exercise of freedom, a manifestation of dignity, and a foundation upon which meaning is built. The camps demanded reflection upon mortality. Death was omnipresent, shadowing every movement, every breath. And yet, I learned that death could illuminate life rather than extinguish it. To confront mortality consciously, to recognize the fragility of existence, to choose purpose, courage, and love in spite of it, is to exercise the last human freedom, the freedom to determine one's attitude in any circumstance. I saw men and women who surrendered entirely to fear and bitterness, and I saw others who, despite profound suffering, refused to yield. They nurtured one another, preserved memory, performed small acts of kindness, and by doing so, demonstrated that meaning is not contingent upon external conditions. The essence of life, I discovered, lies in conscious engagement, in the deliberate choice to act with purpose, in the capacity to assert dignity when the world seeks to erase it. Every moment became an opportunity, to witness, to remember, to love, to endure, to assert freedom, to discover meaning. Even the smallest act carried enormous weight. A shared morsel of food was not merely nourishment, it was affirmation. A comforting glance was not merely recognition, it was defiance. A whispered word was not merely sound, it was proof that the soul remained unconquered. The camps revealed to me that suffering is not an obstacle to meaning, but often its catalyst. When all external markers of value are removed, when comfort, status, and security are stripped away, the soul confronts the question, who am I in this moment? How will I respond? What can I still choose? It is in the answer to these questions that freedom and meaning are discovered. I observed countless acts that seemed insignificant to the outside world but monumental within the confines of our reality. The courage to endure, the will to remain humane, the capacity to care for another despite personal suffering, these were the triumphs of spirit that no barbed wire, no guard, no decree could diminish. The paradox became ever clearer: the more the external world sought to destroy us, the more vividly the inner life asserted itself. Memory, imagination, conscience, and choice became the ultimate forms of resistance. Even the anticipation of a future life, beyond the immediate horror, became a sustaining force. I held on to visions of reunion, of love, of purpose yet unfulfilled. These visions were not fantasy but deliberate exercises in hope, a conscious refusal to surrender to the tyranny of the present. I discovered that the mind and spirit could cultivate resilience in ways the body could not, and in this cultivation, freedom was exercised and meaning discovered. I came to understand that ordinary actions, performed with awareness, become extraordinary. A glance, a word, a gesture each carries the potential to affirm life, to assert dignity, to cultivate meaning. I observed that those who embraced this understanding survived not only physically but spiritually. The external world may have been merciless, but the inner realm remained sovereign. I realized that suffering, extreme as it may be, offers the opportunity to confront the essential question of existence: how will I respond? The answer is neither given nor easy, yet it is within every moment, in every breath, in every thought and action. I learned that love, even in extremity, is the most potent force for sustaining the soul. A shared glance, a comforting word, a simple act of compassion became instruments of freedom and meaning. They reminded us that no matter how harsh the external conditions, the spirit could remain intact, could flourish, could find purpose. The presence of death forced clarity upon life. It revealed what was essential, stripped away the superfluous, and demanded conscious engagement. I observed men and women choosing hope, choosing dignity, choosing life, even when everything seemed to suggest surrender. And in these choices, the ultimate freedom revealed itself, the ability to determine one's attitude, to act with conscience, to find significance in even the smallest gestures. Every day in the camp became a crucible for the soul. The trials imposed were immense, yet they unveiled the boundless capacity for courage, empathy, and conscious living. The realization struck me continually: external circumstances may imprison the body, but they cannot imprison the spirit. The inner life, exercised with awareness, is untouchable. And within this untouchable realm, meaning is cultivated, freedom asserted, and life affirmed. The lessons of these experiences were profound: that suffering need not destroy, that adversity can illuminate, that love endures, and that freedom is inseparable from the conscious choice to respond with dignity, courage, and purpose. I observed that even the most subtle acts, a word, a gesture, a shared memory, could have enormous significance, nurturing hope, asserting freedom, and preserving humanity in the midst of atrocity. And so, I understood that the soul is sovereign, that freedom is exercised moment by moment, that meaning is available even in the harshest circumstances. The camps taught me that life's value is not determined by comfort or safety, but by conscious engagement, by deliberate choice, by the assertion of inner dignity when the external world seeks to negate it. The more I observed, the more I realized that the smallest acts of conscience and compassion are the truest measures of human greatness. Even amidst horror, the spirit can rise. Even amidst despair, hope can flourish. Even amidst death, life can be affirmed. Memory, imagination, reflection, and choice become instruments of survival, triumphs of the spirit, declarations that the human soul cannot be conquered. Even as the days dragged on, monotonous in their cruelty yet relentless in their demands, I noticed how some prisoners found ways to assert their inner freedom, to carve meaning from despair. One man, though weak and starving, composed small verses in his mind, reciting them quietly when he thought no one was listening. Another whispered memories of music, of songs that once carried joy, allowing them to resonate briefly within the walls of the camp. I realized that these small acts of mental and spiritual cultivation were far more vital than the rations we craved, far more sustaining than warmth or comfort. They were acts of defiance, proofs that the human spirit cannot be entirely broken. In those moments, it became clear, survival is not merely physical, it is profoundly moral and spiritual. The choice to remain humane, to remember beauty, to act with conscience, to see beyond immediate suffering, this is what sustains the soul. I also noticed that suffering forced an acute awareness of the present, a stripping away of all illusions, all pretenses. Nothing superficial could persist. The camp demanded confrontation with raw reality, and in this confrontation, the essence of human existence revealed itself. We were forced to ask, what is truly essential, what remains when all else is stripped away, and the answer was always the same: freedom, love, meaning, choice, and responsibility. The external world may dictate pain, deprivation, and fear, but it cannot dictate how we respond to it. Each prisoner became aware, consciously or unconsciously, that the ultimate dignity lies not in survival alone but in how one meets suffering. I observed that the presence of cruelty could either crush or illuminate the inner life. Some chose despair, bitterness, and hatred, their spirits consumed by external conditions. Others, however, chose reflection, compassion, courage, and purpose, revealing that freedom is exercised not in the absence of suffering but precisely within it. And then there were moments that seemed absurdly small yet carried immense weight. A glance exchanged between two prisoners, a small act of protection, a whispered encouragement, these ephemeral acts affirmed life in ways no external recognition could ever measure. It became evident that meaning is not contingent upon grandeur or public acknowledgement. It exists in choice, in awareness, in small acts that reflect the sovereignty of the inner life. Memory and imagination became critical tools of survival. I often recalled my family, the conversations we had, the promises exchanged, the simple yet profound joys of ordinary life. Holding these memories was not a denial of reality but a deliberate exercise of freedom, a conscious cultivation of hope, a refusal to surrender the soul to despair. I encouraged others to do the same, observing how recollections of love, of beauty, of human goodness, even if imagined or distant, could fortify the spirit. Hope, I realized, is not mere wishful thinking. It is an active, deliberate engagement with life, a decision to perceive potential meaning even in circumstances that seem devoid of it. Every day became a test of this inner freedom, to endure, to act with conscience, to choose love and dignity, to find significance in every possible moment. Even in the harshest conditions, the capacity to choose remained untouchable, an eternal testament to the resilience of the human spirit. I observed, too, the paradox of suffering: it can either destroy or illuminate. The same conditions that reduced some to despair revealed to others the boundless capacity for courage, compassion, and reflection. It is not the nature of suffering that determines its impact, but the response of the individual. And in this response, meaning emerges. I saw that those who survived not only physically but spiritually were the ones who consciously cultivated this inner freedom, who found significance in even the smallest acts, who maintained memory and hope, who acted with responsibility despite every external deprivation. Even the anticipation of a future life, however uncertain, became a sustaining force. It reminded us that we are not wholly defined by the present, no matter how dire. Vision, reflection, and purpose allowed the spirit to soar, even while the body was bound by hunger, cold, and fear. I learned to observe subtle signs of humanity persisting in others. A man sharing his meager bread, a whispered word of encouragement, a protective gesture. These were monumental acts, invisible to the world yet potent in affirming life. I understood then that the essence of humanity is revealed not in comfort or success, but in the conscious choice to act with dignity, compassion, and awareness amidst adversity. And even death, omnipresent and terrifying, taught a vital lesson. Mortality sharpens understanding, illuminates what is essential, and demands conscious engagement. To confront death is not to surrender, but to awaken to the profound responsibility of living consciously, deliberately, meaningfully. The ultimate freedom resides in the ability to choose one's attitude towards suffering, to act with conscience, to find significance even when circumstances are bleak. These choices, moment by moment, define the essence of human existence. I observed that even small acts, a glance, a word, a gesture, could sustain life in ways unimaginable. They were proofs of the indomitable spirit, declarations of freedom, manifestations of meaning. And as I watched, I came to understand a deeper truth: the soul remains sovereign. The inner life cannot be taken unless surrendered. Within this inner life, meaning flourishes, freedom is exercised, and life is affirmed, even amidst the most extreme deprivation. Every day in the camp became an opportunity to assert the sovereignty of the spirit, to cultivate hope, to act with compassion, to discover meaning. The external world imposed pain, deprivation, and fear, yet the internal realm remained untouchable. I saw the stark contrast between those who surrendered to bitterness and despair and those who exercised their inner freedom. The former became shadows of themselves, the latter illuminated the harshness around them with their courage, their empathy, their awareness. It became evident that suffering is not a punishment or a mere obstacle. It is a teacher, a crucible, a lens through which the essence of life is revealed. Those who approached suffering with consciousness discovered its capacity to illuminate meaning, to reveal the human capacity for love, courage, and reflection. Even the anticipation of acts not yet performed, words of kindness, gestures of compassion, memories recalled, became instruments of freedom. The camps demonstrated that meaning does not come from comfort or recognition but from the exercise of consciousness, choice, and responsibility. Life's highest values are often discovered when all external markers of security and comfort are stripped away. Memory, imagination, conscience, and choice became indispensable tools for navigating the horror. They allowed the spirit to assert itself, to resist despair, to cultivate hope, and to affirm life even when death and cruelty were omnipresent. And so, I understood that the ultimate dignity lies in this exercise of freedom, the ability to respond to suffering consciously, to act with courage, to choose love, to discover meaning. The external world can impose conditions, yet it cannot dictate the inner life unless we surrender it. This realization became the cornerstone of understanding human existence under extremity. Suffering is not meaningless, freedom is never lost, meaning is always available. Even amidst the deepest horror, the soul can remain sovereign, and in that sovereignty, life finds its highest expression. I saw, with increasing clarity, that those who nurtured even a fragment of hope were able to survive in ways that transcended mere physical endurance. The smallest anticipation, a letter imagined from a loved one, the memory of a smile, the thought of returning to a life beyond the barbed wire could sustain the spirit more than any ration, more than any warmth. The imagination became a sanctuary, a refuge where freedom could be exercised, where the soul could rise above the tyranny of circumstance. I observed men and women who, despite their bodies weakened by hunger, their faces hollowed by suffering, acted with extraordinary dignity. They shared what little they had, comforted one another, and preserved memory and imagination as if they were treasures of immeasurable value. And in doing so, they revealed the central truth of human existence: freedom is exercised not in the absence of adversity but precisely within it. Each choice, each act of conscience, became an affirmation of life itself. I realized then that suffering is not merely something to endure, it is something to understand, something to engage with, something through which the soul can assert itself. Those who surrendered entirely to despair became shadows of their former selves, while those who embraced their inner freedom illuminated the darkness around them with their courage, compassion, and awareness. Even acts that seemed trivial, a comforting glance, a whispered word, a shared piece of bread, held monumental significance. These acts became declarations of defiance against cruelty, affirmations of dignity, and proofs that life, even under the harshest conditions, retains meaning. I learned to observe not only the cruelty but also the quiet acts of resistance, the persistence of hope, and the endurance of love. Love in the camp was subtle yet profound. A look, a gesture, a memory of someone waiting beyond the fences, a silent promise to survive, these were sustaining forces that no hunger, no fear, no cruelty could diminish. I understood that love is inseparable from freedom: to love consciously, to extend compassion despite suffering, to act with conscience and empathy, is to exercise the ultimate freedom of the human spirit. Memory and imagination were crucial instruments in the assertion of this freedom. I carried the images of my family, the conversations, the shared moments, the promises exchanged, and these became more than recollections, they became acts of resistance, affirmations of life, deliberate exercises in hope. I encouraged others to do the same, observing how recollections of beauty, love, and human goodness fortified those who were willing to hold them. Hope, I realized, is not a passive state, it is an active, deliberate engagement with life, a conscious decision to perceive potential meaning even when circumstances suggest futility. Every day presented innumerable opportunities to exercise this freedom, to choose courage, to choose dignity, to choose compassion, to choose meaning. The external world imposed pain, fear, and deprivation, but it could not dictate these choices unless willingly surrendered. I came to understand that suffering, extreme as it may be, can either crush or illuminate the human spirit. The difference lies not in the suffering itself but in the response it elicits. To confront suffering consciously, to find purpose within it, to act with conscience despite it, this is where freedom and meaning emerge. I observed those who survived not only physically but spiritually, and they were distinguished by their ability to consciously cultivate hope, to maintain memory, to act with compassion, and to assert inner dignity. Even the anticipation of future life, uncertain though it may be, provided sustenance. It reminded us that we are never wholly defined by the present, however unbearable. Vision, reflection, and purpose allowed the soul to rise above immediate suffering, affirming life and demonstrating the sovereignty of the inner self. I noted subtle expressions of humanity persisting in others: the man sharing bread, the whispered word of encouragement, the hand extended to support another. These acts, seemingly minor, were monumental affirmations of freedom and meaning. They demonstrated that the essence of human dignity lies not in comfort or security but in the conscious choice to act with conscience, compassion, and awareness. Death, omnipresent and terrifying, taught profound lessons. Confronting mortality revealed what is essential, stripped away trivialities, and demanded engagement with the deepest aspects of existence. To face death consciously is not surrender, it is awakening to responsibility, to the power of deliberate choice, to the cultivation of meaning. The ultimate freedom resides in the ability to choose one's response to suffering, to act with courage, to seek significance even in adversity. Even the smallest acts, a glance, a word, a gesture, could affirm life and sustain the human spirit. These were proofs that the soul cannot be conquered, that freedom remains intact, and that meaning can be discovered in every circumstance. Every day became a crucible for the spirit. The trials of hunger, cold, fear, and cruelty revealed the profound capacity for courage, empathy, reflection, and conscious living. External suffering, though relentless, highlighted the extraordinary strength of the inner life. The camps made it clear that suffering need not destroy, that adversity can illuminate, that love endures, and that freedom and meaning are inseparable. Memory, imagination, reflection, and choice became indispensable tools, allowing the soul to resist despair, cultivate hope, and affirm life even in the presence of death. The ultimate dignity lies in this exercise of freedom, the ability to respond consciously, to act with conscience, to discover meaning despite circumstances. The external world may impose suffering, but the inner realm remains sovereign. I observed the stark contrast between those who surrendered to bitterness and those who exercised their inner freedom. The former became shadows, the latter illuminated the darkness with courage, empathy, and awareness. Suffering is not an obstacle to meaning, it is a teacher. Those who confront suffering with consciousness discover the depth of their capacity for love, courage, and reflection. Even anticipated acts, kindnesses to be performed, gestures of compassion, memories recalled become instruments of freedom. The camps revealed that meaning does not arise from comfort or recognition but from deliberate choice, awareness, and responsibility. Life's highest values often emerge when all external markers are stripped away. Memory, imagination, conscience, and choice become the instruments for navigating horror, asserting the sovereignty of the soul, resisting despair, cultivating hope, and affirming life. In these moments, the human spirit proves indomitable. Even in the deepest suffering, freedom persists. Even in despair, hope can flourish. Even in death, life can be affirmed. The soul remains sovereign. Freedom is exercised moment by moment, meaning can always be discovered, and life retains its highest expression. Every day became an opportunity to assert this freedom, to cultivate hope, to act with compassion, to discover significance. The external world imposed cruelty, deprivation, and fear, yet the inner realm remained untouchable. I observed that the smallest acts of conscience and compassion were the truest measures of human greatness. Even amidst horror, the spirit could rise. Even amidst despair, hope could flourish. Even amidst death, life could be affirmed. Memory, imagination, reflection, and choice became instruments of survival, triumphs of the spirit, and declarations that the human soul cannot be conquered. The sovereignty of the inner life became a constant truth, a refuge, a source of enduring strength. Suffering had revealed that the essence of human existence lies not in external comfort, but in the conscious engagement of the mind and spirit, in the deliberate cultivation of meaning, freedom, and dignity. Even the tiniest gestures, a shared glance, a word, a remembered smile carried profound significance, affirming life, and proving that the soul cannot be subdued. These lessons, learned in the crucible of unimaginable hardship, formed the foundation upon which all future understanding of meaning, freedom, and love would be built. They demonstrated that life retains its value not through ease but through conscious choice, deliberate action, and the assertion of inner sovereignty. The days blended into one another, each indistinguishable from the last, yet each demanded a conscious engagement with the reality of suffering. Hunger gnawed relentlessly, cold pierced every bone, fear lurked in every shadow, and yet, within the seemingly endless monotony, the human spirit revealed its infinite capacity for choice. I observed prisoners who had learned to preserve fragments of dignity even when their bodies were reduced to weakness, who nurtured memory, imagination, and the anticipation of future life, and in doing so, they transcended the immediate horror. Each act of conscious thought, each reflection on what was meaningful, became a lifeline. Even a fleeting thought of someone waiting outside the fences, a whispered memory of laughter, or a recalled moment of love could sustain the spirit more effectively than any physical sustenance. I realized then that the mind and spirit could create freedom where none appeared to exist externally. I watched those who chose despair, who allowed fear, anger, and bitterness to consume them, and I observed their transformation into shadows of themselves. In contrast, those who embraced their inner life, who exercised choice, who preserved memory and imagination, became beacons of human resilience. The smallest gestures, unnoticed by the world outside, carried profound weight. A glance exchanged, a whispered word, a shared morsel of food all became instruments of freedom and affirmation of life. These acts, though seemingly minor, were monumental because they demonstrated that the soul cannot be conquered. In the midst of unimaginable cruelty, I understood that suffering itself is not the enemy. It is the response to suffering, the engagement of consciousness, the deliberate cultivation of hope and meaning, that determines whether one is broken or elevated. The paradox of the camps was striking: the harsher the conditions, the more clearly the soul could assert itself. Even in total deprivation, meaning could be discovered; even in constant fear, freedom could be exercised; even in the presence of death, life could be affirmed. I observed acts of extraordinary courage and compassion, a man shielding another from the harshest punishments, a whispered encouragement in the midst of despair, a silent act of kindness that illuminated the darkness. These were proofs of the indomitable human spirit, reminders that love, dignity, and meaning endure even when all external markers of security are stripped away. Memory and imagination became vital tools. I carried the images of my family, the promises we had exchanged, and moments of ordinary beauty. These were not escapes from reality but deliberate exercises of freedom, instruments for asserting life in the face of death, and shields against despair. I encouraged others to remember as well, observing how these recollections nurtured hope and preserved humanity. Hope, I realized, is an act of consciousness. It is a decision to perceive potential meaning, to envision life beyond the immediate suffering, to hold on to possibilities even when the present is unbearable. Every moment in the camp presented an opportunity to exercise this freedom, to choose courage, to act with dignity, to extend compassion, to cultivate meaning. The external world could impose pain, fear, and deprivation, but it could not dictate the inner response unless willingly surrendered. Suffering, I discovered, can either destroy or illuminate. Its impact is not inherent in its intensity but in the response it elicits. Confronting suffering consciously, seeking purpose within it, acting with conscience despite it, this is the exercise of freedom and the discovery of meaning. Those who survived spiritually, not just physically, were distinguished by their ability to engage consciously with their inner life, to nurture memory and imagination, to act with compassion, and to preserve dignity. Even the anticipation of a future life, uncertain as it may have seemed, provided sustenance. It reminded us that the present, however unbearable, does not define us entirely. Vision, reflection, and deliberate engagement allowed the spirit to rise above immediate suffering, affirming life and demonstrating the sovereignty of the inner self. I observed subtle signs of humanity persisting in others, sharing bread, offering whispered encouragement, protecting one another from harm. These small acts were monumental affirmations of freedom and meaning. They demonstrated that the essence of human dignity is exercised not through comfort, but through conscious choice and action. Death, omnipresent and terrifying, revealed profound lessons. Mortality sharpens perception, strips away trivialities, and demands engagement with the most essential aspects of existence. To face death consciously is not surrender, it is awakening to responsibility, to the power of deliberate choice, and to the cultivation of meaning. The ultimate freedom lies in determining one's response to suffering, in acting with courage, and in seeking significance despite adversity. Even the smallest gestures, a glance, a word, a remembered act could sustain life and assert the sovereignty of the soul. Every day became a crucible for the spirit, revealing the extraordinary capacities for courage, empathy, reflection, and conscious living. The external world imposed relentless suffering, yet the inner realm remained sovereign. I saw the contrast between those who surrendered to despair and those who exercised inner freedom. The former became shadows, the latter illuminated the darkness with courage, empathy, and awareness. Suffering is not a punishment or meaningless obstacle, it is a teacher. When confronted consciously, it reveals the capacity for love, courage, and reflection. Even anticipated acts of kindness, gestures of compassion, and recollections of beauty become instruments of freedom. Meaning is not derived from comfort or recognition but from awareness, choice, and responsibility. Life's highest values emerge when all external markers are removed. Memory, imagination, conscience, and choice guide the spirit through adversity, assert freedom, resist despair, cultivate hope, and affirm life. The human spirit, I observed, is indomitable. Even in deepest suffering, freedom persists. Even in despair, hope can flourish. Even in death, life can be affirmed. The sovereignty of the inner life is a constant truth, a refuge, and a source of enduring strength. Suffering reveals that the essence of existence lies not in external ease but in conscious engagement, deliberate action, and the assertion of dignity. Even the smallest gestures, a shared glance, a remembered smile, a word of encouragement carry profound significance, proving that the soul cannot be subdued. These lessons, forged in the crucible of unimaginable hardship, form the foundation upon which all understanding of meaning, freedom, and love is built. Life retains its value not through ease but through conscious choice, deliberate action, and assertion of inner sovereignty. The human spirit, I observed, cannot be broken so long as it exercises consciousness, choice, and awareness. The camps, though instruments of unimaginable suffering, became a mirror reflecting the profound capacities of the human soul. In every act of courage, compassion, and reflection, I witnessed proof that meaning is discoverable even in the direst circumstances, that freedom is exercised within, and that life, even amidst death, retains its highest expression. I came to understand that the most ordinary moments could become extraordinary through conscious awareness. A glance, a whispered word, a remembered melody, each became a lifeline, a way to assert freedom and discover meaning. Even the act of recalling a loved one's smile or a shared laugh from the past became a deliberate act of resistance against the overwhelming reality of suffering. I noticed that those who cultivated such inner life, who allowed memory and imagination to coexist with the brutal present, were the ones who preserved not only their sanity but their humanity. They embodied the profound truth that freedom is exercised not in comfort, but precisely in the presence of adversity. Every morning, I observed the prisoners rising with bodies weakened and spirits burdened, yet some carried a light in their eyes, a reminder that the inner self cannot be entirely crushed. I realized that hope is not a passive feeling, it is a conscious decision, a choice to perceive potential meaning, to nurture life within oneself despite the external despair. In this space between suffering and response, I found the essence of human freedom. The camps were a theater of paradox, extreme deprivation stripped away every superficial comfort, yet revealed the unbreakable core of the soul. Those who embraced consciousness, choice, and reflection discovered that suffering itself could illuminate the path to meaning. I saw acts of compassion that the world outside would never acknowledge. A man sharing his last piece of bread, a whispered encouragement to someone on the verge of collapse, a silent protective gesture. These were monumental, invisible declarations of freedom and proof that life could be affirmed even in the shadow of death. Love, I observed, persisted in subtle yet powerful ways. A glance of understanding, a remembered embrace, a silent promise to survive, these were lifelines that defied the cruelest circumstances. Love and freedom were inseparable. To choose to love consciously, to act with compassion despite suffering, is the ultimate affirmation of life and the exercise of freedom. I carried memories of family, conversations, laughter, and ordinary moments, and these became more than recollections. They were acts of deliberate choice, affirmations of life, and tools for resisting despair. I encouraged others to nurture memory and imagination as well, observing how these practices fortified the spirit and preserved humanity. The anticipation of a future life, uncertain as it might be, became a sustaining force. It reminded us that we are not defined entirely by the present, however unbearable. Vision, reflection, and purpose allowed the spirit to rise above immediate suffering and assert its sovereignty. I witnessed subtle signs of humanity persisting in others, sharing bread, extending encouragement, protecting one another. These acts, small yet profound, affirmed freedom and meaning. They demonstrated that human dignity is exercised not through comfort, but through deliberate choice, awareness, and moral action. Mortality, ever present and terrifying, taught clarity. Life's essence is revealed when confronted with its finitude. Death sharpened perception, stripped away trivialities, and demanded engagement with the essential. To face death consciously is not surrender, it is awakening to responsibility, deliberate choice, and the cultivation of meaning. Ultimate freedom resides in choosing one's response to suffering, in acting with courage, in seeking significance despite adversity. Even the smallest gestures, a glance, a word, a remembered act could sustain life and affirm the sovereignty of the soul. Each day became a crucible, revealing extraordinary capacities for courage, empathy, reflection, and conscious living. External suffering highlighted the strength of the inner life. I saw those who surrendered to despair and those who exercised inner freedom. The former became shadows, the latter illuminated darkness with courage, empathy, and awareness. Suffering is not a punishment, it is a teacher. Confronted consciously, it reveals the capacity for love, courage, and reflection. Anticipated acts of kindness, gestures of compassion, recollections of beauty become instruments of freedom. Meaning does not come from comfort or recognition, but from awareness, choice, and responsibility. Life's highest values emerge when external markers are stripped away. Memory, imagination, conscience, and choice guide the spirit, resist despair, cultivate hope, and affirm life. The human spirit is indomitable. Even in deepest suffering, freedom persists, even in despair, hope flourishes, even in death, life can be affirmed. The sovereignty of the inner life is a refuge and a source of enduring strength. Suffering reveals that the essence of existence lies not in ease but in conscious engagement, deliberate action, and assertion of dignity. Even the smallest gestures, a shared glance, a remembered smile, a word of encouragement, carry profound significance. They prove the soul cannot be subdued. The lessons forged in the crucible of unimaginable hardship form the foundation for understanding meaning, freedom, and love. Life retains its value not through comfort, but through deliberate choice, conscious action, and assertion of inner sovereignty. The human spirit cannot be broken so long as consciousness, choice, and awareness are exercised. The camps, instruments of unspeakable suffering, reflected the extraordinary capacities of the human soul. Every act of courage, compassion, and reflection proved that meaning can be discovered even in the direst circumstances, that freedom is exercised within, and that life retains its highest expression even amidst death. I noticed that those who nurtured hope, however faint, survived in ways that transcended physical endurance. A thought of a loved one, a memory of laughter, a moment of beauty imagined, all became a sanctuary, a way to assert freedom and discover meaning. Memory and imagination were not escapes but deliberate acts of resistance. Those who clung to them preserved humanity and asserted sovereignty over their spirit. I observed the same principle in small acts of kindness, in whispers of encouragement, in gestures of solidarity. These proved that even in the harshest conditions, the human spirit remains untouchable. Suffering, extreme though it may be, does not determine the soul's fate. The response of consciousness, the cultivation of meaning, the choice to act with courage and compassion, this is where freedom is found. Every day presented opportunities to exercise this freedom, to nurture hope, to preserve dignity, to discover significance. The inner life, unbroken by external cruelty, becomes the ultimate sanctuary. Even amidst death, despair, and unimaginable hardship, freedom can be exercised, meaning can be discovered, and life can be affirmed. I began to see the intricate patterns of survival not merely in physical endurance but in the conscious exercise of freedom and the cultivation of meaning. Each prisoner faced the same brutal reality, yet the outcomes diverged profoundly, depending on the choices they made within their inner world. I observed that those who focused solely on external conditions, the deprivation, the fear, the cruelty, quickly succumbed to despair. But those who turned inward, who nurtured memory, imagination, hope, and conscience, discovered a reserve of strength that was impervious to the harshness surrounding them. Even the smallest acts of reflection became instruments of resistance. Remembering a conversation with a loved one, recalling a song, or silently reciting a passage of meaning transformed ordinary moments into lifelines. I realized that the mind and spirit could create freedom where none seemed to exist externally. Every decision, every thought, every choice to act with dignity or compassion became a proof of life. I noticed a subtle rhythm to survival. Those who nurtured small sparks of hope, however tenuous, endured in ways that transcended physical survival. Even a fleeting memory or imagined reunion could sustain the spirit more effectively than food or warmth. The paradox of extreme suffering became evident. The harsher the conditions, the more distinctly the inner freedom revealed itself. Those who consciously engaged with their inner life, reflecting, remembering, imagining, choosing, demonstrated that even in the most unimaginable adversity, meaning could be discovered, freedom exercised, and life affirmed. I witnessed extraordinary acts of courage and compassion, a man shielding another from punishment, a whispered word of encouragement, a protective gesture that defied cruelty. These acts, unnoticed by the outside world, were monumental declarations of freedom, proofs that life could be affirmed even in the shadow of death. Love persisted in subtle, almost invisible ways, a glance, a shared memory, a silent promise to endure. Love and freedom were inseparable. To act with compassion, to extend kindness despite suffering, was the ultimate expression of life. Memory became a sacred instrument. I carried the faces, voices, and laughter of my family, and these recollections became more than comfort. They were deliberate exercises of freedom, shields against despair, and instruments of hope. I encouraged others to do the same, observing how these mental acts preserved dignity and humanity. Anticipation of a future life, however uncertain, became a sustaining force. It reminded us that we are not wholly defined by the present, however unbearable. Vision, reflection, and deliberate action allowed the spirit to rise above immediate suffering, affirming life and demonstrating the sovereignty of the inner self. I observed subtle but profound expressions of humanity, sharing bread, offering encouragement, protecting one another from harm. These small acts affirmed freedom, meaning, and dignity. They proved that the essence of human existence is exercised not through comfort or security, but through conscious choice and moral action. Death, omnipresent and terrifying, offered clarity. Mortality sharpens perception, removes trivialities, and demands engagement with the essential. To face death consciously is not surrender, it is awakening to responsibility, to deliberate action, and to the cultivation of meaning. Ultimate freedom resides in choosing one's response to suffering, in acting with courage, and in seeking significance despite adversity. Even the smallest gestures, a glance, a word, a remembered act, could sustain life and assert the sovereignty of the soul. Each day became a crucible, revealing extraordinary capacities for courage, empathy, reflection, and conscious living. The external world imposed relentless suffering, yet the inner realm remained sovereign. I observed those who surrendered to despair and those who exercised inner freedom. The former became shadows, the latter illuminated darkness with courage, empathy, and awareness. Suffering is not a punishment, it is a teacher. Confronted consciously, it reveals the capacity for love, courage, and reflection. Anticipated acts of kindness, gestures of compassion, recollections of beauty, and imagined reunions become instruments of freedom. Meaning does not arise from comfort or recognition but from awareness, choice, and responsibility. Life's highest values are discovered when external markers are removed. Memory, imagination, conscience, and choice guide the spirit, resist despair, cultivate hope, and affirm life. The human spirit is indomitable. Even in deepest suffering, freedom persists. Even in despair, hope flourishes. Even in death, life can be affirmed. The sovereignty of the inner life is a refuge and source of enduring strength. Suffering reveals that the essence of existence lies not in ease but in conscious engagement, deliberate action, and assertion of dignity. Even the smallest gestures, a shared glance, a remembered smile, a word of encouragement, carry profound significance. They prove the soul cannot be subdued. The lessons forged in the crucible of unimaginable hardship form the foundation for understanding meaning, freedom, and love. Life retains its value not through comfort, but through deliberate choice, conscious action, and assertion of inner sovereignty. The human spirit cannot be broken so long as consciousness, choice, and awareness are exercised. The camps, instruments of unspeakable suffering, reflected the extraordinary capacities of the human soul. Every act of courage, compassion, and reflection proved that meaning can be discovered even in the direst circumstances, that freedom is exercised within, and that life retains its highest expression even amidst death. I noticed that those who nurtured hope, however faint, survived in ways that transcended physical endurance. A thought of a loved one, a memory of laughter, a moment of beauty imagined, all became a sanctuary, a way to assert freedom and discover meaning. Memory and imagination were not escapes but deliberate acts of resistance. Those who clung to them preserved humanity and asserted sovereignty over their spirit. I observed the same principle in small acts of kindness, in whispers of encouragement, in gestures of solidarity. These proved that even in the harshest conditions, the human spirit remains untouchable. Suffering, extreme though it may be, does not determine the soul's fate. The response of consciousness, the cultivation of meaning, the choice to act with courage and compassion, this is where freedom is found. Every day presented opportunities to exercise this freedom, to nurture hope, to preserve dignity, to discover significance. The inner life, unbroken by external cruelty, becomes the ultimate sanctuary. Even amidst death, despair, and unimaginable hardship, freedom can be exercised, meaning can be discovered, and life can be affirmed. I began to notice that the human spirit thrives not merely through survival, but through conscious engagement with every passing moment. Even the bleakest day, the most relentless hunger, the sharpest pangs of fear, could be transformed into opportunities for the assertion of freedom. I saw men whispering memories, sharing fragments of songs, recounting stories from lives left behind, and in these fleeting moments, life asserted itself, meaning bloomed, and hope found a fragile foothold. The imagination became a refuge, a sanctuary where the soul exercised sovereignty over circumstances. Those who nurtured this inner life were not merely surviving, they were reclaiming themselves, affirming dignity, and preserving humanity in defiance of every attempt to strip it away. I observed that hope is not a passive sentiment. It is deliberate, active, and conscious. To hope is to recognize the possibility of meaning, even when the present is unbearable. It is to invest oneself in the future, however uncertain, and to assert freedom in the face of confinement, fear, and death. Every thought, every remembered smile, every imagined reunion with loved ones became an instrument of resistance against despair. Small gestures, nearly imperceptible to the eyes of others, revealed the depth of human dignity. A shared glance, a word of encouragement, the offering of a fragment of bread, these acts, though seemingly minor, were monumental affirmations of life. I saw love persist in subtle ways, a protective look, the remembrance of a tender touch, a silent vow to endure. Love, I realized, is inseparable from freedom. To act with compassion despite suffering is the highest exercise of the human spirit. Memory became a sacred practice. I carried the faces, voices, and laughter of family and friends, recalling ordinary moments with extraordinary reverence. These memories were not escapes, they were deliberate acts of freedom, shields against despair, and instruments of hope. I encouraged others to cultivate the same inner life, witnessing how recollections of love, beauty, and human goodness fortified the spirit and preserved dignity. Anticipation of a future life, however distant and uncertain, provided sustenance. It reminded us that the present, however intolerable, does not define us entirely. Vision, reflection, and deliberate engagement allowed the spirit to rise above immediate suffering, asserting sovereignty over the inner self. I observed subtle expressions of humanity in others, sharing bread, offering encouragement, protecting one another. These acts affirmed freedom, meaning, and dignity, proving that the essence of human existence is exercised not through comfort, but through conscious choice and moral action. Mortality, ever present and terrifying, revealed clarity, confronting death sharpens perception, strips away trivialities, and demands engagement with what is essential. To face death consciously is not surrender, it is awakening to responsibility, deliberate action, and the cultivation of meaning. Ultimate freedom resides in choosing one's response to suffering, in acting with courage, and in seeking significance despite adversity. Even the smallest gestures, a glance, a word, a remembered act, could sustain life and assert the sovereignty of the soul. Each day became a crucible, revealing extraordinary capacities for courage, empathy, reflection, and conscious living. The external world imposed relentless suffering, yet the inner realm remained sovereign. I observed those who surrendered to despair and those who exercised inner freedom. The former became shadows, the latter illuminated darkness with courage, empathy, and awareness. Suffering is not a punishment, it is a teacher. Confronted consciously, it reveals the capacity for love, courage, and reflection. Anticipated acts of kindness, gestures of compassion, recollections of beauty, and imagined reunions become instruments of freedom. Meaning does not arise from comfort or recognition but from awareness, choice, and responsibility. Life's highest values emerge when external markers are removed. Memory, imagination, conscience, and choice guide the spirit, resist despair, cultivate hope, and affirm life. The human spirit is indomitable. Even in deepest suffering, freedom persists. Even in despair, hope flourishes. Even in death, life can be affirmed. The sovereignty of the inner life is a refuge and source of enduring strength. Suffering reveals that the essence of existence lies not in ease but in conscious engagement, deliberate action, and assertion of dignity. Even the smallest gestures, a shared glance, a remembered smile, a word of encouragement, carry profound significance. They prove the soul cannot be subdued. Lessons forged in unimaginable hardship form the foundation for understanding meaning, freedom, and love. Life retains its value not through comfort, but through deliberate choice, conscious action, and assertion of inner sovereignty. The human spirit cannot be broken so long as consciousness, choice, and awareness are exercised. The camps, instruments of unspeakable suffering, reflected the extraordinary capacities of the human soul. Every act of courage, compassion, and reflection proved that meaning can be discovered even in the direst circumstances, that freedom is exercised within, and that life retains its highest expression even amidst death. I noticed that those who nurtured hope, however faint, survived in ways that transcended physical endurance. A thought of a loved one, a memory of laughter, a moment of beauty imagined, all became sanctuaries, ways to assert freedom and discover meaning. Memory and imagination were not escapes but deliberate acts of resistance. Those who clung to them preserved humanity and asserted sovereignty over their spirit. I observed the same principle in small acts of kindness, in whispers of encouragement, in gestures of solidarity. These proved that even in the harshest conditions, the human spirit remains untouchable. Suffering, extreme though it may be, does not determine the soul's fate. The response of consciousness, the cultivation of meaning, the choice to act with courage and compassion, this is where freedom is found. Every day presented opportunities to exercise this freedom, to nurture hope, to preserve dignity, to discover significance. The inner life, unbroken by external cruelty, becomes the ultimate sanctuary. Even amidst death, despair, and unimaginable hardship, freedom can be exercised, meaning can be discovered, and life can be affirmed. And so I understood that the trials of the camp, as harrowing as they were, became a mirror reflecting the potential within every human being, the capacity to choose, to love, to endure, to create significance, and to preserve the soul's sovereignty. In this realization, I saw the path forward. Even when external circumstances strip life bare, meaning remains accessible, freedom remains unassailable, and the human spirit can rise, luminous and resilient, against all odds. And so, as the days in the camp stretched endlessly, I came to recognize the profound truth: Suffering, no matter how extreme, cannot destroy that which chooses to endure with awareness. I saw men and women reduced to skeletal forms, their bodies exhausted, their eyes hollowed by hunger and fear, yet their souls remained luminous. It was here, in the most harrowing of circumstances, that the sovereignty of the inner life revealed itself with startling clarity. The choice to act with dignity, to exercise compassion, to cultivate hope, and to find meaning became the truest measure of human greatness. I realized that the external world, no matter how cruel, cannot dictate the spirit unless it is surrendered voluntarily. Freedom, I understood, is not the absence of constraint, it is the ability to respond consciously, to choose one's attitude, to assert life in the face of death. Every remembered smile, every imagined reunion, every small act of kindness became a defiance against the forces seeking to strip humanity away. These acts, seemingly insignificant to an outside observer, held infinite significance to those who performed them and to those who received them. Love persisted, subtle but invincible, woven into glances, gestures, and shared recollections. It reminded us that even when stripped of everything, we retain the capacity to care, to connect, to affirm life. Memory and imagination became sacred instruments, preserving identity, sustaining hope, and asserting freedom. In recalling the faces of loved ones, the voices of friends, and the ordinary moments of beauty, prisoners fortified their souls and nurtured meaning. I encouraged others to engage in this practice, witnessing how it preserved not only sanity but humanity. Anticipation of a future, though uncertain, became a lifeline. It reminded us that life extends beyond immediate suffering, that our essence is not bound solely by circumstance. Reflection, vision, and deliberate engagement allowed the spirit to transcend deprivation, affirming life even in the presence of death. The external cruelty of the camp served as a relentless teacher. Mortality sharpened perception, stripped away trivialities, and revealed the essential. To face death consciously is not surrender, it is an awakening to responsibility, to choice, and to the cultivation of meaning. Ultimate freedom resides in this conscious response, to act with courage, to seek significance, to exercise love and compassion despite adversity. Each day, each small gesture, a glance, a word, a remembered act became a lifeline, asserting sovereignty of the soul. The crucible of suffering revealed extraordinary capacities for courage, empathy, reflection, and conscious living. I observed the contrast between those who surrendered to despair and those who embraced their inner freedom. The former became shadows, the latter illuminated darkness with dignity, awareness, and hope. Suffering, extreme though it may be, is not a destroyer but a teacher. It unveils the potential of the human spirit, the capacity to act with conscience, to cultivate meaning, and to love despite adversity. Even the anticipation of acts of kindness, recollections of beauty, and imagined reunions became instruments of freedom. Life's ultimate values emerge not from comfort, but from conscious choice, deliberate action, and assertion of dignity. Memory, imagination, conscience, and choice guide the spirit, resist despair, cultivate hope, and affirm life. The human spirit remains indomitable, even in deepest suffering, freedom persists, even in despair, hope flourishes, even in death, life can be affirmed. The sovereignty of the inner life is an enduring refuge. Every seemingly minor gesture, a shared glance, a remembered smile, a word of encouragement carries profound significance. They prove that the soul cannot be conquered. Lessons forged in unimaginable hardship form the foundation of understanding meaning, freedom, and love. Life's value is determined not by external comfort but by conscious engagement, deliberate action, and assertion of inner sovereignty. The camps, though instruments of suffering, reflected the extraordinary potential of the human soul. Every act of courage, compassion, and reflection demonstrated that meaning can be discovered even in the direst circumstances, that freedom resides within, and that life retains its highest expression even in the shadow of death. I observed those who nurtured hope, however faint, surviving in ways that transcended physical endurance. A thought of a loved one, a memory of laughter, a moment of beauty imagined, all became sanctuaries, asserting freedom and discovering meaning. Memory and imagination were not escapes but deliberate acts of resistance. Those who clung to them preserved humanity and sovereignty over their spirits. Small acts of kindness, whispers of encouragement, gestures of solidarity, all revealed the untouchable nature of the human spirit. Suffering does not determine the soul's fate, consciousness, choice, and the cultivation of meaning do. Every day presented opportunities to exercise freedom, nurture hope, preserve dignity, and discover significance. The inner life, unbroken by external cruelty, became the ultimate sanctuary. Even amidst death, despair, and unimaginable hardship, freedom can be exercised, meaning discovered, and life affirmed, and in this profound recognition, I glimpsed the bridge to what lay beyond the camps, the understanding that life's deepest purpose is never given by circumstance, but found in the conscious engagement of the soul, in the deliberate cultivation of meaning, and in the unwavering assertion of inner freedom. It is here, in the unyielding exercise of choice, reflection, love, and hope, that the human spirit shines, resilient and luminous, illuminating the path forward even after the darkest nights. This is the revelation that will carry us into the next chapter of life, that even when stripped bare, when confronted with the abyss, when faced with the most profound suffering, we are never truly powerless. Freedom endures, meaning persists, and the soul remains sovereign, ready to rise and embrace life anew. Emerging from the shadow of the camps, I carried with me the weight of what had been endured, yet also the revelation of what had been discovered. The physical world was no longer the sole measure of life, the inner realm, the domain of consciousness, choice, and reflection, revealed itself as the true territory of freedom. I began to understand that survival alone is not enough. To live fully, one must engage deliberately with existence, seeking meaning in every action, every thought, every encounter. The external world may impose suffering, deprivation, and injustice, yet it cannot determine the value of life unless the soul consents. In the aftermath, I observed the enduring scars of trauma, both visible and invisible, etched into the lives of those who had survived. Yet alongside these scars, I saw resilience, courage, and the capacity for profound insight. Those who had embraced their inner life during suffering carried a luminous understanding, that life's deepest meaning is revealed not through ease or comfort, but through conscious engagement with reality, through the deliberate cultivation of values, through love, hope, and responsibility. Every moment now became an invitation, to act with conscience, to seek purpose, to affirm life, to transform pain into understanding. I saw how many wandered after the camps, searching for a sense of normalcy, yet discovering that external stability alone could not heal the inner fractures. True restoration required attention to the inner self, a recognition of the sovereign domain of consciousness, a commitment to exercise freedom deliberately. I began to speak with survivors, observing the diversity of responses. Some were consumed by bitterness and despair, clinging to past injustices, allowing suffering to define them entirely. Others had learned to engage with the memory of pain, transforming it into insight, empathy, and a commitment to life. I understood that the latter had discovered the essential truth: meaning is not given, it is sought; freedom is not granted, it is exercised; life's value is not inherited, it is consciously affirmed. Each day presented opportunities to choose how to respond to reality, to transform experience into understanding, to act with responsibility despite uncertainty. The aftermath of extreme suffering revealed the fragile yet enduring nature of hope. Those who nurtured hope, however small, began to reconstruct not merely their lives, but the very essence of what it meant to be human. Memory of the past became a teacher, imagination a guide, and conscious choice the instrument by which life could be reclaimed. I saw love emerge anew, fragile yet powerful, the capacity to care despite loss, to connect despite fear, to commit to life despite the shadow of death that lingered in memory. In this stage of life, freedom and responsibility became inseparable. To exercise freedom is to act deliberately, to choose meaning over despair, to embrace the moral imperative to live fully despite adversity. I observed how the lessons forged in suffering could illuminate paths for others, the capacity to endure, to empathize, to act with dignity, to cultivate meaning in the face of uncertainty. The crucible of trauma revealed the profound insight that every human being possesses an inner domain that remains inviolate, a space where choice, reflection, and conscience reside, where freedom is exercised, and where meaning can be discovered. It is here that life's deepest values are found, not in accumulation, recognition, or comfort, but in deliberate engagement with existence, in the cultivation of purpose, in the exercise of love, hope, and responsibility. I began to understand that the ultimate liberation is internal, the recognition that, no matter the external circumstances, we retain the power to choose our attitude, to find significance, to act with integrity, to affirm life. Each encounter, each decision, each reflection now held the potential to transform existence. I observed that those who embraced this understanding navigated the aftermath of suffering with resilience and insight, discovering that the very experience of extreme adversity could enrich the capacity for empathy, moral courage, and conscious living. Pain, loss, and deprivation became teachers, guiding those who listened toward the profound recognition that life's meaning is neither simple nor given, it is cultivated through conscious effort, deliberate choice, and moral engagement. I saw individuals begin to rebuild relationships, reconnect with communities, and participate actively in life, not merely as survivors but as witnesses to the human capacity for resilience, freedom, and purpose. Memory, imagination, and reflection became the pillars of reconstruction, tools to navigate the uncertainty of the world while maintaining sovereignty over the inner life. I observed how deliberate action, rooted in responsibility and purpose, became the instrument by which life could be reclaimed and redefined. Hope, fragile yet persistent, served as a compass, guiding the spirit through the aftermath, illuminating paths toward significance, joy, and connection. I realized that even after the extremity of suffering, life offers opportunities for meaning, in relationships, in service, in the pursuit of truth, in the conscious cultivation of values. The human spirit, resilient and luminous, demonstrates its capacity to rise, to rebuild, to transform trauma into insight, despair into purpose, and loss into an affirmation of life. And so, the journey continues, a passage from the shadow of the camps into the full engagement with existence, a recognition that freedom, meaning, and responsibility are inseparable, that the inner life is sovereign, and that the exercise of consciousness, choice, and moral courage allows life to be lived fully, profoundly, and with enduring significance. And so, as I reflect on those harrowing days within the camps, I understand now that the true measure of a human being is not found in comfort or ease, nor in the absence of suffering, but in the unwavering exercise of the inner life. In the face of hunger, fear, and relentless cruelty, those who preserved their dignity, nurtured memory, imagination, and hope, and acted with compassion, revealed the profound truth, that life retains its meaning even in the shadow of death. Freedom, I realized, is not granted by circumstance, it is claimed within the soul, through conscious choice, deliberate action, and the cultivation of values that transcend the immediate suffering. Every act of courage, every whisper of kindness, every remembered smile became a testament to the indomitable nature of the human spirit. And in this recognition, a revelation emerges, that even when the world strips away everything external, the inner realm remains sovereign, unassailable, and luminous. Suffering does not annihilate meaning, it magnifies it. Death does not silence life, it illuminates its urgency. And even amidst the deepest despair, the human soul retains the capacity to rise, to choose, to love, and to affirm life. The camps, as brutal as they were, became mirrors reflecting the infinite potential of consciousness, the enduring power of choice, and the luminous persistence of meaning. Here lies the lesson that will endure beyond the fences, beyond the hunger, beyond the fear, that the essence of our existence is discovered not in what we are given, but in what we choose, in how we respond, and in the courage with which we assert the sovereignty of the soul. The spirit that survives suffering, that embraces meaning, that exercises freedom deliberately, is invincible. And it is this realization that will guide us forward, into the next chapter, into the life that awaits beyond the shadows, where every moment becomes an opportunity to live deliberately, consciously, and profoundly.